Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
You know, before we get started here, I just have to admit this. Right before I pressed record to start the show, I was listening to a series of rockabilly / skiffle pastiche songs. They really move me. And I just want to be doing that now. I want to grab my guitar and play for you inexpertly. That describes most of what I do here. And my guitar skills are hugely inexpert, but I just feel like rocking out. But no, this is not the time for that. So we will be taking the usual journey to the past in order to understand the present, the vehicle being baseball. I usually say that later in the show, but it seems important to reassure both of us about that right now. I will not be bursting out with Leadbelly's Rock Island line, even though I really want to. I'm always honest with you, so I just have to say that even as we continue to talk about the past and the present, that somewhere inside me I'm shouting, ABC double XYZ, cat's in the cupboard, but he can't dig me. Actually, the cat is right over here, asleep on the chair. The cat doesn't care whether she digs me or not. And thank goodness I got past that stage of my life with human females. You expect it from cats from the opposite sex. It's a little bit more difficult. So I talked about Rafael Devers and the trade that sent him away from the Red Sox a bit on this week's reissue episode. That was the new material. I put new material in every reissue episode. Not a baseball trade, but an emotional trade. In this episode, I wanted to give you an analogous trade from nearly 100 years ago, just about 99 years ago, in fact. What were you doing then? Were you busy? Rogers Hornsby, terrible Texan, remains a unique player in the history of baseball, and not just because he came to the major leagues at a time when the game was still primitive in so many ways, scouting, training, racing. No, not racing. Racisming is what I was trying to say, so that the separation between the great player and the good player was wider than it is now. Even so, he was unique because, having acknowledged those caveats, he had a weird combination of skills. If you can picture Vladimir Guerrero, Vlad the First, Vlad the Father, not Vlad the Son, if you can see that guy who's now hanging around Cooperstown, scampering around at second base, then you'll about have the picture. What other second baseman has been like that? There are only 19 players who were primarily Keystone Cops in the Hall of Fame. None of them bears the slightest resemblance to him. Maybe in some senses Ryne Sandberg, although it was impossible for Ryne Sandberg, well, not impossible, but unlikely that Ryne Sandberg would hit 335 or, for that matter, 420 in the 1980s. Now, some of them, including Sandberg, played in more competitive versions of baseball with harder parks, relievers, night games, integrated rosters, so they did have a more difficult time of it. But I'm just talking about the shape of Hornsby's hitting. He resembles Vlad Guerrero more than he does his peers. The Raja of Swat came up with the Cardinals in 1915, played some third and short for a few years before settling in at second in 1920 under manager Branch Rickey. Now, no one knew this then, but by that time, he had already led the National League in wins above replacement 4 times. That same year, the same year he moved to second, he won the first of 6 consecutive batting titles. In 1922, he'd win the NL Triple Crown, hitting .401 with 42 home runs and 152 RBIs. In 1924, he hit .424 and finished second to Brooklyn's Dazzy Vance in the MVP voting. Weird decision, that one. In 1925, he hit .403 and finally won the award. He won a second MVP, unusual in those days, when they figured that everyone should have a turn, with the Cubs in 1929. It's how he got to the Cubs, or at least how this player, who completed a 13-year stay with the Cardinals with averages of .359, .428, .568, and 92 wins above replacement. Again, nobody thought in those terms then, but we can. How he got sent away from there about 2 months after winning as player manager the first championship in team history. This seems very salient given the Red Sox trading away Rafael Devers last week. The short version for both, I think, is not that either the Cardinals or Red Sox thought they'd be better without Hornsby and Devers, respectively, but rather they thought that they'd be happier without them. They didn't go on a baseball basis. They went because they were too annoying, and this is a subjective thing, for them to deal with for a moment longer. Now, by 1926, Rickey was the general manager under owner Sam Breeden. Breeden was a car dealer, real estate developer, and a hard-elbowed guy, a temperamental guy. If you ticked him off, he made his judgments and he was done with you. It even happened to Rickey many years after this. Well, it happened to Rogers too, and with perhaps more justification. Before we get to 1926, it's just important to remember that Rogers was not an easy guy to deal with at any time, and that everyone involved had been dealing with him for 8 to 10 years at this point. Sometimes they were dealing with him emotionally, and sometimes they were dealing with him physically, by which I don't necessarily mean that he gave everyone around him indigestion, although that might have been true, but that sometimes the only way to communicate with him, or the only way he'd choose to communicate with you, is by, as I often say when a couple of my cats get into it, throwing paws. Either way, even when things were relatively quiet, he was a guy who had a way of projecting himself into your consciousness, into your concerns, your worries, perhaps your dreams. You didn't have a lot of long weekends when you weren't thinking about Rogers Hornsby in some ways, and that kind of friction mounts up over the years no matter how good a player is, or for that matter, no matter how much an owner or general manager has benefited from being around him. And maybe the reverse was true too. I know it was, actually. Did Rogers find Rickey and Breeden irritating as hell? Oh, yes, he did. And whether he was justified or not, again, these are subjective things. And we ask a lot of people to make organizational level judgments that ignore their own feelings about things, about people. I have no idea whether it's apocryphal or not, but I always think of that anecdote, and I'm sure I've quoted it to you many times here during the run of the show, when Lincoln was approached by his commanding generals who were irritated with Ulysses Grant, didn't want him around anymore, and they said he's annoying, and he smells, and he drinks, and what have you, and Lincoln said, "I can't spare this man, he fights," which of course was quite the contrast with George McClellan, who Lincoln had actually written a letter to. He never sent it. He just slammed it in his desk after he wrote it. But he said, "Dear General McClellan, if you're not going to use the army, do you mind if I borrow it for a while?" There's another one. I don't recall if he sent this one or not, but at one point he wrote to McClellan and said, "Why haven't you attacked?" And McClellan wrote back, "The horses are tired." And Lincoln said, "How can the horses be tired when you haven't gotten anywhere?" My larger point is that most leaders, when they get to that stage of a relationship, and most people in their private lives, they say, as Casey Stengel once did, "This man is limited, let's disappear him." And in fact, that was the second time that Lincoln put his own feelings aside and made the organizational level decision, the first 1,000 being not firing McClellan on about 999 other occasions. If I can digress just a half second longer, on one occasion, Lincoln and his Secretary of State, Seward, actually went to McClellan's house to find him because he wasn't being responsive to them, and the guy wouldn't come downstairs. "No, too tired. Come back tomorrow." Do you know how fast I personally would have fired that guy? Just for the disrespect. This is from Michael Burlingame's 2-volume biography of Lincoln. McClellan manifested his contempt for Lincoln in deeds as well as words. Less than 2 weeks after his elevation to the supreme command, he returned home from a wedding to discover the president, John Hay, and Seward waiting for him. According to Hay, the general, quote, "without paying any particular attention to the porter, who told him the president was waiting to see him, went upstairs, passing the door of the room where the president and Secretary of State were seated. They waited about half an hour and sent once more to the servant to tell the general they were there, and the answer coolly came that the general had gone to bed. As they returned to the White House, Hay bemoaned this unparalleled insolence of epaulets, but Lincoln seemed not to have noticed it specially, saying it was better at this time not to be making points of etiquette and personal dignity. What I'm trying to say to you is, if you had gotten to the point with someone that I personally have gotten to with General McClellan and I wasn't even there, that Lincoln perhaps should have gotten to with General McClellan far faster than he actually did, then you might have traded Rafael Devers too. Just before the 1926 World Series opened at Yankee Stadium, Hornsby was notified that his mother had died. According to Rogers, his mother had left word that should she check out during the postseason, apparently this was not unexpected, he should still play. And so, not to be crass about this, but okay, I'll be a little crass, they put the old girl on ice until Rogers could finish with baseball and get home. Some owners might have thanked Rogers, the team's great star and manager, for not absenting himself during the championship. Imagine if both Dave Roberts and Shohei Ohtani had left town during the World Series. The way Dave Roberts has managed some of those World Series, some of you may be thinking, not a bad thing. The Cardinals won it in 7 games too, but if Breeden was happy about that, he was also a little bit skeeved out by the idea of a guy deprioritizing his mom's passing. Now you might be thinking, maybe Raj and his mom weren't close. Maybe they were estranged. No, they were close. This was just how he decided to do things, again, supposedly at her instruction, and it's hard to second-guess him nearly 100 years later, but Breeden apparently first guessed him. He also knew Hornsby owed gambling debts all over town. Hornsby loved the ponies, so much so that Judge Landis later told him to cut it out. He didn't. Breeden didn't like that either. A man, he thought, paid his debts. And also, and here is the disease of all owners, he was threatening to get more expensive, and he already owned or had been given a good chunk of Cardinals stock. Breeden was determined to deal a 400 hitter because he was annoying, because he questioned his habits, his morals, and because he cost money. Now, Rickey wasn't going to talk him out of it because he and Hornsby didn't get along either. In fact, they had come to blows on at least one occasion, as I alluded to earlier. Worse for Hornsby, after the World Series, he openly moved against Rickey, demanding a bigger contract than Rickey, a higher rank in the organization, meaning final say on moves, and of course he wanted a raise. He asked for a 3-year contract at the new higher rate. Breeden countered with 1 year, knowing that Hornsby would probably refuse and desperately hoping that he would. Well, he did. And while negotiations were at least on the surface ongoing, Breeden had Rickey trade Hornsby to the Giants. Very fortunately for Breeden, he had great timing in that the Giants also had a disgruntled star, Frankie Frisch, who played the same position as Hornsby, but had jumped the team after one too many abuses by John McCraw. Frisch came in, played really well, and was a lot more athletic than Hornsby, so he gave the fans something different, but just as fun to look at. And the team kept winning, playing 4 World Series and winning 2, while Frisch was on the team and sometimes managing it. I never will forget Frankie Frisch, Breeden said, for saving my life. From the fan backlash about dealing Hornsby, he meant, if that wasn't obvious. After Breeden died in 1949, Ford Frick remembered, "Funny thing about Sam, he was supposed to be so hard-boiled, but if a man got into trouble, nobody pleaded his cause more ardently than Breeden. Sam's credo was, give the guy another chance, and if he goes wrong again, bear down." Well, he bore Hornsby right out of town, and although Rogers had a few more good years, his career was never really the same. For Breeden's part, he owned the Cardinals for a bunch more World Series, sold the club for a good deal of money, and life went on, except a lot more happily, because except for coming home to someone you don't like, there is nothing worse than going to work and having to deal for 8 hours plus a day with someone you hate. This will be true so long as baseball is run by human beings and not Vulcans, and remains the case even among the most contemplative of monks, who mind the counters and pour the drinks inside the infinite inning. Well, hello Hello there, and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 336 in an ongoing series. I am Stephen Goldman, your convivial host for, as I said earlier, this trip to the past with a mission of better understanding the present. Normally in this segment, I linger a bit, I talk about what's on my mind, I ask you what's on yours, but I'm going to go, as they say, allegro, because as you might be able to hear, or as you might have heard in the first segment, my voice is fighting me a bit tonight. I don't know why that is. I'm healthy. I don't have a cold or anything, but it just happens sometimes. And I think it's due to environmental conditions, some aspect of the weather that changes the environment in my studio here, if we can call it a studio. The atmosphere is a little bit different, and then rather than having my voice issue out in the usual dulcet tones that we both have grown used to lo these many years, I feel like I'm gargling gravel. Not that it hurts, I mean, it's not like a case of COVID. I mean that I have to speak through it, a layer of it. And it matters not whether I'm here with hot tea or tea with honey or a cold drink or a bucket of oatmeal and lemons. Whatever Ty Cobb used to use for heat exhaustion, it was something to do with oatmeal and lemons. And either he or Babe Ruth put a cold lettuce leaf under their caps, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. None of it matters. I may choose to treat this with an entire pizza, because it would be fun and just as effective. It may simply be that I have not given the old pipes adequate rest because I'm going through one of the occasional periods of insomnia that I suffer. It's very frustrating. It's not that I struggle to fall asleep, it's that I struggle to stay asleep. And I might go to bed even early by my standards, which are abysmal, and sleep for anywhere from an hour to 2.5 hours. And then I wake up and I am wide awake. So I get some unplanned reading done and get to hear the birds chirp as the sun comes up, which, if you've ever dealt with insomnia, is actually a really depressing thing to experience from the wrong side of sleep. And whether I try to stay awake or I go to bed at that point, my work is deleteriously affected because either I'm going to start late because I overslept and compensating for being awake, or I'm going to work badly because I am in a zombie-like mode from lack of sleep. It's been a while since this happened to me, and some of my regular medications have a bit of a soporific effect, which helps smooth over one of the nice side effects in some cases. My body's tendency to drift ever more towards a night owl-like schedule until I actually work my way around the clock, and then I'm a day person again, which never feels good. Being a day person is fine. I just mean the process of extending oneself hour by hour until one doesn't see daylight for a while. I've been able to avoid that, but not so much this week. And the sad result is that, at least from my perspective, my voice feels like a large bear is trying to crawl up my throat and out as I am speaking to you. Sorry for that imagery. I am so glad I have nothing to promote this week. BP was dark for Juneteenth, which happens to be my day to publish, so I got the week off. Lucky me. Mostly I slept because I was catching up. We won't go through that again. As I said earlier, I talked some about the Devers trade in this week's reissue episode and also brought back some stories about resistance to authority. Seemed timely. I hope you'll check that out. Next, though, after a quick break, another ripped from the headline story that has some personal resonance for yours truly. I hope to see you on the other side, bear or not. Rawr.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
I admit that during the break, I went back and listened to a little more of that rockabilly music, but I did not sing along because, again, the bear. One of the odd ways that the state of the nation affects me is that it references a very minor childhood trauma of mine. It both is and isn't something that happened to me and is also something that I both witnessed and didn't witness. I'll explain that in a second and then get to the baseball of all of it. When I refer to the state of the nation, I am referring to the masked banditti who are grabbing people off of our streets, not even saying, "Papers, please," but just deciding that person is it in a very sinister game of tag, and then throwing them into unmarked cars. I'm not going to argue just now with any listeners I might have left who think that this is the right and proper and necessary way to do things to enforce the law and promote the general welfare and so on. I happen to think it's about as un-American as anything that's happened in my lifetime, but let's not have that argument right now. What I want to stipulate, and I hope you will too, whatever your point of view, is that whatever the necessity, legality, or morality of these actions is, that what is being done is indistinguishable from kidnapping. Should a policeman in uniform with a badge number walk out of his marked police car, what they used to call a growler? Do they still call them a growler? A radio car, to go far back. If a policeman walks up to you and says, "I'm sorry, sir, you're drunk and disorderly. I'm afraid you're going to have to be placed under arrest. You're going to have to come with me," and so on, that is a comprehensible thing that happens in a free society. The fact that it might be a trumped-up charge, that the policeman might be acting out in some way or abusing his authority notwithstanding, you at least know who you're dealing with. If a bunch of masked men pop out of a car, said car, again, unmarked, and they're not masked in that fun Lone Ranger fighting for justice with silver bullets kind of way, but wearing the kind of masks that the rest of us might wear for health, but we're not supposed to anymore because somehow that's been politicized, and they grab your friend, your loved one, your wife, your kid, and throw them in the back of a car, if they grab a total stranger, how do you know what just happened? Sometimes on social media, you see people younger than I am asking, is it really true that back as recently as, well, I'm not sure what year, but certainly when I was a kid, children just went out and played unsupervised, just roamed everywhere. And yeah, of course it was true. In my case, that came with some heavy restrictions from my parents, but I ignored those a lot. And as I was something of a latchkey kid, they weren't around to monitor compliance anyway. Sometimes I got into some trouble that wouldn't have happened had I honored those restrictions, and I sometimes marvel that I lived, but mostly it was fine. Yet the fears of child abduction that keeps kids to carefully managed flocks now was already a powerful, strong thing then, and this was before pictures of vanished children started popping up on the side of milk cartons. It wasn't quite simultaneous with the satanic panic that gripped the country for a while, but it definitely overlapped with it and was part of it. So even as I was going out and being a little brave and going to some dangerous places I shouldn't have, I was very aware that this was something I should be worried about. Sick people who are going to try to lure you, grab you, and then anything could happen. We need not list those possibilities. There was one summer afternoon I was out by myself on my bicycle. I don't recall precisely how old I was, perhaps 10, in that ballpark, still very much a child. There was a time when the neighborhood that I grew up in was teeming with other kids for me to hang out with, to be friends with, to play with, as children do. But there came a time my parents regretfully missed and denied, when there was a kind of mass turnover, as if there had been a signal, and all the family-oriented people moved out, and a different sort of population moved in. And I am not speaking of a particular racial, economic, ethnic, cultural, religious population. I am just trying to say that the makeup of the area changed. And so there were times that I'd wake up on a summer morning, jump onto my bike, and almost immediately run into a friendly group that, again, I could play with as a child. There was this later period where I'd go out and run into no one, and then a little later, run into kids who didn't want to play as children do. They wanted to steal my bicycle. I really am struck by the fact, as I describe this, that the ethnic makeup of the neighborhood was about the same before and after. On both sides of this period, it was actually pretty mixed. It was just the character of the people that had somehow changed. I'm kind of grateful for that because I didn't learn the kind of hatred that I might have at a young age had anyone looked around and said to me, "It used to be good people, but now it's all Westphalians. You know how they are." It was a different kind of education. It used to be good people. Now it's just an ecumenical, non-denominational rainbow coalition of assholes. Sorry, you just had bad luck. And actually, this probably goes back to our first segment, the Rafael Devers and Rogers Hornsby trades. Because if you think about it, it probably wasn't even what I described to you. It was probably just that my neighborhood lacked bullies when I was a very young kid. We just happened to be a bit short on future sociopaths and serial killers. And then that changed. And it only takes a little, in the same sense that one drop of food coloring in a glass of water will turn the whole thing whatever color you just added. One bad person can destroy your environment. And again, that's why it makes sense to trade Rogers Hornsby. What I'm about to describe to you happened in that middle period. I went out and there was no one around. So I just cycled in aimless circles for a bit, hoping that someone would show up. I happened to be on the sidewalk by that neighborhood's main thoroughfare when a car came rushing up the street, music blaring out of open windows. Neither was terribly unusual. What was unusual was that, as the car passed, a girl or young woman was leaning out of the window, arms extended, shouting, "Help! Help! I'm being kidnapped!" And she went on screaming in like fashion as the car rapidly disappeared down the street and was gone. The whole thing could not have taken more than 10 seconds. Let me begin by saying that the child version of me was strongly under the impression that it was some kind of joke. She looked to be sort of a teenager to me. She looked to me to be laughing or smiling, but I also didn't get a good look at her at all. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt that maybe it had been real after all. This was also, as far as I'm aware, before my town had anything like 911. If it did have it, I didn't know about it at that age. It was definitely before the average person could carry a phone on their person, if anyone could. I had not noted the make and model of the car, or even the color. I've never been that excited by cars, and even today, I can't tell you much about what's on the highway. It's something I pay attention to if we need a new car, and I forget about it the rest of the time. I was all alone, and there were no grown-ups anywhere that I could talk to. I just kept playing it back in my mind. Was it a couple of teenagers joyriding and the girl was laughing as she screamed like she was being kidnapped? To a party or to a store that she didn't want to go to. She was being satirical. I could swear she had been smiling. Or maybe she was just screaming, and that smile was a grimace. To this day, I don't know. Even back then, as a little kid, I was in the habit of reading newspapers, watching the evening news with my dad, and so I resolved to pay attention and see if anything was reported in my area. It never was. I spent a lot of time wondering which version of what I'd seen was accurate, and I am not exaggerating when I say that I think about this about once a week to this day, wondering if I failed terribly by not running around and screaming, "Help!" myself, if I was complicit in a terrible crime. I never did hear about any kidnapping in my area. In telling you this story, I went back and checked the same newspapers I would have had access to then, and they had nothing that matched what I just told you. Still, I'll never know the answer. Not every crime gets reported, and a lot of kidnappings are among estranged family members. Maybe they handled it privately. I could guess anything, and I'd be right, and I'd also be wrong. In these days, as masked men, again, not like Batman, but just guys in blue jeans, are jumping out of unmarked cars and grabbing people with names like Roberto Clemente, Luis Aparicio, Juan Marichal, Tony Perez, shoving them into those cars and just disappearing them all together, sometimes to prisons in foreign lands. I ask myself, if the situation repeated, would I be brave enough to interfere and thereby redeem myself? I hope I would be. There is a baseball aspect to this, which comes to mind as I tell you this story. Fortunately, it's more, well, sad funny than it is tragic or terrifying or uncertain. As with part one of the show, it happens, this is just a coincidence, I did not plan it this way, to involve a player who was a key part of the 1926 Cardinals. And I will tell you what happened to him, or what he claimed had happened, right after this brief intermission. So as I said a few moments ago, both of today's stories have connections to the 26 St. Louis Cardinals. I should say 1926 St. Louis Cardinals because 2026 is almost upon us, as frightening as that is. As we meet today, we are nearly at the halfway point of 2025. In the 1920s and 30s, the National League enjoyed the company of pitcher Flint Rem. Full name, Charles Flint Rem. He went by his middle name, obviously enough, and he had some little ability. He threw hard, and he led the National League in wins with the aforementioned 1926 Cardinals, going 20-7 with a 3.21 ERA. His career doesn't look like anything much, in part because the 1920s and 30s were a difficult time for pitchers to put up good stats, in part because the Cardinals tired of him and sold him down to the Phillies, who thenceforth sent him to the Braves, and in both cases that was like being in the minor leagues while still playing in the majors. He wasn't even the best pitcher on the Cardinals that year, and maybe wasn't even one of the 20 best pitchers in the league. His 20 wins tied for the lead with 3 other pitchers. On a WAR basis, his best season was actually in 1932, which he split between the Cards and the Phils. That was the fateful year, and he went 15-9 with a 3.59 ERA, which meant he outpitched the Baker Bowl. That was the only season in which the Phillies finished over 500 between 1917 and 1949. I guess he had something to do with that. Nevertheless, Rem was considered a disappointment because he drank a lot. He was one of those pitchers of the period, like Pete Alexander and Shufflin' Phil Douglas, that culturally it was okay to laugh at as they destroyed themselves. Like Phil, sometimes Flint went on binges so bad he didn't show up for games, including the ones he was meant to start. One such occasion, one that was particularly ill-timed, came late in the 1930 season. The National League had a pretty good pennant race that year. At the end of play on September 16th, with 10 or 12 left to play, depending on the team, the Cardinals and the Dodgers were mathematically tied for first place, with the Giants a game and a half back, and the Giants just hanging in there at 4.5 back. The Cardinals and Dodgers happened to be playing each other at Ebbets Field at that moment, and ultimately, the Cardinals' sweep of that series would be a huge factor, obviously, in their winning the pennant. Rem made that a little harder than it might otherwise have been. He was already skating on kind of thin ice in every sense. He had been mediocre at best in 1927 and 1928, and his drinking had been so out of hand that Ricky sent him down for the entirety of 1929. He got married that year, though, and Ricky was always a sucker for the redemptive power of a good marriage. And so the Cardinals, who still had his rights, brought him back for 1930. He pitched very sparingly at first, mostly out of the bullpen, but about a third of the way through the season, he did get another shot at the rotation and pitched passingly well. His ERA was 4.45, which doesn't look, well, it looks bad, but this was 1930, the ultimate hitter's year, and a 4.45 in the National League at that time, particularly if you adjust for Sportsman's Park, is probably like a 3.75 in 2025, a 3.80. It's not ace level, but it's certainly something that you can live with. One of the Cardinals' better pitchers that year and best pitchers in that period was left-hander Wild Bill Hallahan, who struck out a bunch of batters by the standards of that day, and he was supposed to start Game 1 of the crucial Cardinals at Dodgers series. Unfortunately, he was hurt. Wouldn't you know it, he slammed his pitching fingers in a car door. And so, Rem was tabbed by manager Gary Street, the old Sarge for his First World War service, in combat no less, to start this key game. He didn't show up at Ebbets Field. He didn't show up anywhere. The Cardinals were legitimately concerned. They actually called the cops and reported him missing. Meanwhile, they got Wild Bill Hallahan dressed. I'd like to imagine that they swaddled him in bandages from head to toe, sent him out there anyway, and this led to a game that was very memorable in its time. Despite being injured, Hallahan pitched the game of his life. He was out there against the incredible Dazzy Vance, also still at the peak of his powers. The two pitched a double shutout that lasted the full 9 innings. The Cardinals broke through in the top of the 10th with a kind of Manfred Mann run, although in this case, leadoff man Andy Hyde doubled to open the inning instead of being placed there. Hallahan himself bunted him over to third, and center fielder Taylor Douthit who had enough range in the outfield that he made you doubt your hit, singled him home. 1-0 Cardinals. The Dodgers loaded the bases with 1 out in the bottom of the 10th, but Hallahan induced catcher Al Lopez to ground into a game-ending 5-4-3 double play, but it was a very close thing, with the final relay from second baseman, guess who, Frankie Frisch, to first baseman Jim Bottomley, just beating Lopez to the bag. Final line for Dazzy, 10 innings, 7 hits, 1 run, no walks, 11 strikeouts. For Wild Bill, 10 innings, 5 hits, no runs, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts. The Dodgers promptly went on a 7-game losing streak, and that was pretty much the pennant race. So, great. Except that Hallahan wasn't even supposed to be there that day. And where the hell was Flint Rem? He showed up at the team hotel that night. There are a lot of versions of what he said to Gabby Street, but all of them converge around something like this. I was standing outside the team hotel yesterday, Skip, waiting on a taxi cab when this car came by and 2 fellas called to me. I went over there, and before I knew it, they pulled guns and pushed me into the car. They drove me to a house way over in New Jersey and held guns on me and forced me to drink whiskey all day. They must not have wanted me to pitch against Brooklyn. Some versions add exaggerated irony, having Rem say things like, they forced me to drink, me, of all people, with my abhorrence of liquor. It was horrible, Sarge, horrible. It was all a lie, of course. He had never left his room. He was in bed with a bottle, probably several bottles, too smashed to get up. I will say this much for his story. By the standards of 1930, it's kind of believable. If you survey the news of the time, you would swear that abductions were a fad, the new national pastime. It was as if some large percentage of people suffering the effects of the Great Depression said, well, Maud, I can't get a job, but I can snatch somebody and send a ransom note. Okay, Bruce, you do that. The kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh's son was part of that. And that's a serious thing, the loss of a child. So all I have to say to Flint Rem is, don't joke about that sort of thing. Someone might take you seriously and still be troubled by it decades after the fact. I must admit I'm shocked at the length of this episode, but as always, a story is the length that needs to be told, and I am very grateful not to have to push my voice any further. Should you wish to follow me on social media, you can do so at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And there's a Facebook group. Why? I don't know, but I really am setting up this outside website. It's just taking some time. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there. Should you wish to support the show, and I very, very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. That wasn't too painful, was it? Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.fishsticksno.bandcamp.com. Just kidding. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please visit the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do that, head over to YouTube and do it there. Like and subscribe because it helps with their algorithm, and suddenly we have YouTube listeners. And oh God, I've finally descended to being one of those smash that like button people. Pray for me. Our theme song, which you're hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who reminds us that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world, so now is the absolute wrong time for those 3 little people to get that throuple off the ground. Someday you'll understand that. Well, if I understand that, I'll be back next week with a repaired voice, I hope, and more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.